Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with music for masochists. 10 Masochisterpieces, if you want to call it that. Yes, something to really punish yourself with, something with which to really punish yourself, however you grammatically express it. This is music that just makes you suffer. Well, sometimes they say suffering is good for the soul. Well, you can decide for yourself whether it is or it isn't for you with this absolutely foolproof list of music guaranteed to cause you as much pain as possible. Some of it is pain through endurance. Some of it is pain through cacophony. Some of it is just plain pain for the sake of pain. Here it comes. First, the ultimate music of masochism, Satie's Vexations. Now, people sort of know this piece. It's a joke, of course, that Satie wrote. It's a single atonal, nasty-sounding sequence of chords that you're supposed to play like 5,785 billion times. I mean, he actually gives you the number, but it doesn't matter. It's a made-up, very large number of times until you go completely insane. It has been recorded. No one has done it complete, not surprisingly, but you know, how many repetitions the recording contains depends on how serious the artists were. And, you can listen to it yourself and get a sense of it. And if you want to hear all 50,375,822,615.7 repetitions, just play it over and over again until your mind turns to jello. So that's part number one, or point piece number one. You may never even get past that in this Masochisterpiece list. Number two, another piano work here, the Boulez Piano Sonata number 2. Now, this was a iconic work. It really was. It is like absolutely iconic work of total serialization, which means all the parameters of the piece were determined by 12-note theory and dodecaphony and rules about repetition and duration and rhythm and what you could and couldn't do. It's totally, completely, utterly, rigorously structured to the point where it hardly seems to be music at all. The iconic recording of this iconic Masochisterpiece was Maurizio Pollini's. And the rumor, of course, has it that Pollini spent like years learning to play the thing because just playing it was, virtually, inconceivable when he wrote it, when Boulez wrote it, and played it for Boulez, at which point Boulez proceeded to criticize the performance relentlessly and tell him everything that was wrong, at which point Pollini threw up his hands and said, okay, screw it, I'm never doing that again. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it makes a great story. It's a wonderful apocryphal tale. There have been other fine performances of it, including Edel Biritz on Naxos. It's like it's been done before. It's Boulez's longest piano sonata, one of his longest pieces, actually, in any form, I think. And, oh my goodness, it's just such a waste of time. Oh, wow. But it was, in its day, quite admired. Perhaps it still is by certain people. I don't know. You can listen to it and decide how much you want to admire it for yourself. And while we're on number 2s, let's talk about Morton Feldman's Second String Quartet. Now, Morton Feldman's music is marvelous. I really like Morton Feldman, generally speaking. I really do. But the Second String Quartet is like, I don't know. I have it. It's like 5 CDs. It's like, who knows? 4, 5, 6 hours long. It depends how long you play it in one gigantic movement. And he wrote pattern pieces. He took little tiny modules of atonal note clusters, played very, very softly, and spread them out to unconscionable lengths, and very, very slowly varied them. Now, some of the works in this style are really, really fascinating when you can hear the pattern slowly changing over time. But the real question with the string quartet, which is just endless, and like I said, lasts about, an entire epoch, is how long you can sit without having to get up and go to the bathroom or interrupt the experience, or have a snack, or belch, or or whether you could stay awake. It really flirts with the boundaries of human endurance. Some would say it oversteps the boundaries of human endurance. It is a marathon, a masochisterathon, if you want to call it that. Just really, really long, crazy, silly, long, nutso, long thing. It's long. Get it? So that's number 3. Number 4, something a little livelier and perkier. Alan Pettersson Symphony No. 9. If you've ever wondered how long you can stretch out a chromatic scale, then this is the piece for you. I enjoy much of Alan Pettersson. Well, enjoy maybe isn't the word. What is the expression for what you feel after you listen to Alan Pettersson? You may want to kill yourself. It is definitely suicidal music. It's dark. It's gloomy. It's intense. It's sometimes incredibly beautiful. It's not harmonically all that difficult, except the 9th is a little rough. The 9th is his longest symphony. It's about 70 minutes long, and it sounds like 70 minutes of chromatic scales. Sometimes they get louder, sometimes they get softer, but basically it just goes like that. And it does that for about 70 minutes. And when that's over, if you haven't turned to jello or gelatin or jelly or some blobulous substance, then you're made of tougher stuff than I am, because it is really, really a chore to get through this particular symphony. And let's not kid ourselves. People talk about, oh, I love it. It's wonderful. It's marvelous. Well, maybe it is. But it's an endurance test, again, of a different type than the Feldman. And that was intentional. I mean, you can't write 70 minutes of nasty chromatic scales for orchestra and not plan on punishing your audience and making them suffer. And Pettersson suffered. He had horrible arthritis. He was sick for most of his life. He lived in a state-granted apartment next to people who did nothing but play Swedish rock music. I mean, talk about masochist. Or sadism. I mean, it's even worse. So yeah, that's definitely on the list. Oh, and this next one is a classic, an absolute classic of masochistic mayhem. Sorabji, Opus Clavicembalisticum. Now, Sorabji was one of those. He was an Indian, British, quasi-independently wealthy, misanthropic, aesthete type who banned performances of his music because it was being done so badly. Not surprisingly, it's written badly. And so the performances usually go badly. Nowadays, people can actually do it. They have the technique to play it. He's famous. He wrote all kinds of music. I mean, there's orchestral pieces, there's stuff. Most of it's never been performed. But his monster pieces for piano that last hours and hours and hours and have endless fugues and themes with 400 variations and passacalias with 10,000 variations and fugues in 95 parts that last an hour and a half. I mean, he had absolutely no sense of where his music was going and what it wanted to do. Harmonically, it all sounds like mud. It's just late romantic, post-Scriabin chromatic sludge. And he smears that sludge out for, oh my God, it's just unconscionable lengths, and it's a punishment. It really is a punishment. And in order to make it playable, you have to diddle the scores anyway. I mean, I had some experience with that with some pianists who've played his music and have showed me his manuscripts versus what actually has to be played, because it's impractically written, and he was living in his own little misanthropic bubble. And so he wrote Masochisterpieces, of which Opus Clavicembalisticum is merely one. There's the Sequentia Cyclica, there's the 100 billion transcendental etudes, and it's all based on the virtuoso school of Liszt and Busoni, has been expanded and inflated and conflated and deflated and disflated beyond all recognition. Busoni actually heard his first piano sonata and was encouraging to him. Busoni was a nice guy, and he wrote to a friend of his, well, I just heard this thing by Sorabji. It's incredibly ugly, but, I need to give him encouragement. So he shouldn't have been so encouraging. Next. Oh, wow. Here's another one that's just an ordeal. Arthur Schnabel's Symphony No. 2. Now, Arthur Schnabel was, of course, the great pianist who was, considered to be one of the most transcendentally refined and brilliant interpreters of Beethoven and Schubert and, the great Viennese piano masterpieces. And he was also a composer. He took his compositions quite seriously. His compositions were very strictly, dodecaphonic, 12-tone, and torturous, and extraordinarily difficult to play, and just as extraordinarily difficult to listen to. They go absolutely nowhere. They're just a giant tangle of dissonant, anguished, torturous harmony and counter stuff. I wouldn't call it counterpoint because there's nothing pointed about it. It's smeared out over time. Some of it has been performed now as complete piano works, were quite admirably performed by Jenny Lin, among others, some others who've attempted them. They are as ungracious and unrewarding and unappealing and unappetizing and masochistic as anything anybody ever wrote. Really, really painful. And it's interesting to note, that having, spent his life playing, as he called it, music that is better than it can be played, he wrote music that is uglier than it can be listened to, or something like that. So after Schnabel, this is actually a nice, warm, fluffy tonal piece comparatively, but it's no less masochistic. It's Hans Pfitzner's Cantata von deutscher Seele, to poems by, I think, Eichendorff, or one of those Orff people, Dorfs or something like that, German poem. Now, I encountered this piece for the first time when I was lying awake at night, trying to breathe, having suffered an absolutely dreadful asthma attack. And there used to be an all-night program on WQXR here in New York, the all-nighter. And they were doing like a bunch of things. They were doing Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe, and then they did Wagner's Das Liebesmahl der Apostel, which almost made this list, except it's just a little bit too short. It's absolutely Wagner's worst piece in the world. It's for gigantic, mostly a cappella male chorus, and it's just dreadful. Even Wagner thought so. But this isn't about bad music. This is about masochistic music, and that piece almost gets there, but not quite. And then after I suffered through the Wagner, as I'm wheezing and I'm all pumped up on adrenaline and all these awful medications that were supposed to help you back in the day, that they realized were absolutely useless. All they did was make you want to vomit, and it was awful. So I'm up there, I'm in bed, lying in bed, awake, wheezing and gasping and feeling just horrible. And I had just listened to Daphnis and Chloe, which was fine. Then they did the Wagner Das Liebesmahl der Apostel. It was like a choral night. And then came Pfitzner's von deutscher Seele. Now, I said to myself, as they announced it, they said, well, here comes Pfitzner's cantata on the German soul. I said to myself, how long can a cantata on the German soul possibly be? Right? Oh, my God. It's not actually all that long. I mean, it's long. It's an hour and 20 minutes. It's Mahler's symphony-ish kind of long, right? But it seems like it goes on forever. I mean, especially when you're in a hallucinatory state, gasping for air. I don't recommend it to anybody. It was possibly the most masochistic musical experience that I've ever undergone, and I've never forgotten it. And ever since then, when I listened to the work, and it was recorded by Deutsche Grammophon, and I think there's maybe one on Orfeo too, and Kubelik did it. And, it is one of the most self-laceratingly dull things that you will ever hear in your entire life. It's brutal. It's pretentious. it's soggy and thick and droopy, and it's everything you want to know about the German soul. Let me tell you, it does the German soul no favors. If you're really interested in the German soul, I would avoid this cantata, at least if you think that it has a potential to be like soulful on the good side. So then there's that. So that's, you notice that a lot of these pieces actually come out of the German school. They will, because, I mean, because Germans are good at masochism. They're good at sadism too, but masochism is, I think, a particular musical specialty of the German school. And it's certainly the governing factor in our next work, Michael Gielen's string quartet, Un Vieux Souvenir. Oh, what a charming title. An old souvenir, an old memory, something full of nostalgia and warmth and fuzzy intimacy. Wrong. Absolutely not. It was recorded by the La Salle Quartet on Deutsche Grammophon. It's based on a Baudelaire poem about a dead swan's rotting corpse. And if you've ever wondered what a dead swan's rotting corpse sounds like, then listen to Gielen's string quartet. Because the first time I put it on, the strings are all going like... Yeah. I mean, you'd never even know it's a string quartet playing it. It's the sound of utmost vileness and horror and revulsion and yeah. I said to myself, gee, that sounds like the sound of a dead swan's rotting corpse. It's absolutely a masochistic experience. Now, Gielen, I mean, you know, he was the master of masochism, musical masochism. His whole concept of music was that life is ugly and horrible, and I have to demonstrate just how ugly and horrible it is in everything that I do. That was his specialty. He was the patron saint of musical nihilism and a wonderful conductor. Don't get me wrong. But, you know, his theory of life and art was well, let's put it this way. It was masochistic. It really was. And after that, here's a piece you may not have heard or may not know, and it's really a wonderful opportunity for you to suffer for only about 20 minutes. It is extraordinarily excruciating for a lot of reasons. It's Czech composer Jan Klusák's Variations on a Theme of Gustav Mahler. And this has been recorded a couple times. It's in that Antral box of live stuff, and Libor Pešek made a recording of it for Superfun, I believe. I remember the first time I heard it. I got it because, oh, how cool. Variations on a Theme by Mahler. Oh, you have such expectations. And the theme is that of the Adagietto of the Fifth Symphony. So you hear, I mean, he plays, it starts with the Adagietto of the Fifth Symphony. It's beautiful. It's lovely. It's the Adagietto. And you think, oh, here come the variations. And then you think, oh, God, here come the variations. Because the variations are also written in a, what you might call, squeak bloop dodecaphonic format. So you hear da, 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 da. It's lovely, Mahler. And then you hear eek, ook, wagga, wagga. Like that for the next 17 minutes or so. Oh, what a punishment that was. My God, what was he thinking? I have no idea what he could have been thinking, but the result was masochism on an epic scale. It's one of the great unknown Masochisterpieces. I mean, you know, people just don't know this work as well as it should be known. It should be right up there in the pantheon of Masochisterpieces, masochistic marvels, and marvelous, never mind. And last but not least, my all-time favorite Masochisterpiece, the Schoenberg Wind Quintet. Now, most people don't even know Schoenberg wrote a wind quintet. This is supposed to be his first work in which 12-tone method is applied to strictly classical forms. Yeah, right. Now, I've talked about this before, but it's a story worth repeating because it was just so memorable. There was a recording of this sucker on Denon back in the early days of compact discs. And in those days, Denon had indexing. Most people don't even remember what that was. But initially, compact discs were designed with inner track indexes that would allow you, theoretically, to jump within a movement or something to important points. Like if it was a sonata form movement, you could hear the exposition and then the development using the index function, which was, and then on CD players, and certain CD players had this function for discs that were provided with that kind of opportunity. And this was one of them. So I thought to myself, this is the absolutely perfect time to really learn to grasp the 12-note idiom in a convenient chamber music-like way with lots of, individual timbres and things that should distinguish themes and motives. I thought, gee, it's going to be great. And I could index the whole thing was indexed. So I went to the exposition of the first movement, which was as horrible as you could imagine. It was, horn, it was a atonal dodecaphonic wind quintet. And I listened to that exposition 30 trillion times so that it was absolutely in my head, so that I could sing it as I just did. I mean, just hum it as I was tripping down the street. I was in college then, so I was walking to class. I was humming Schoenberg's Wind Quintet. And then once I had the exposition completely committed to memory, I was going to listen to the recapitulation just to hear how I could grasp the overall form. So I indexed it over to the recapitulation, and I didn't recognize a note of it. I have never been so annoyed. I mean, I felt totally betrayed. I was completely pissed. Then I looked at the notes and it said, oh, well, the recapitulation is a cancresans. Oh, yeah. In other words, it's it's the initial tone row played backwards and inverted, with its intervals all inverted and played backwards and sideways. I mean, it was totally unrecognizable. So I took the disc and I just frisbeed it out the window. I lived, I think, the fifth floor of Woolman Hall at Johns Hopkins University. It's probably still sitting there in the little courtyard between the apartments. It was the most masochistic musical experience I have ever subjected myself to voluntarily, and I did it to myself. And that's the governing theme of all of these pieces. You do it to yourself when you're feeling like you need a little bit of musical penance and things have been too easy, your life is going too well, and everything is euphonious and beautiful, and the sun is shining, and things are terrific. Play these. They will change your attitude lickety-split. I guarantee it. So go forth, my friends. Enjoy your Masochisterpieces. Have a great time. Take care.